if you can actually pull people out of their groups and have them interact as human beings, it is unbelievable, the progress. Now, I don't just mean exposure. I mean actually interacting with each other.
Sit at a table, get to know each other. The American academic, lawyer, and best-selling author Amy Chua on the issue of political tribalism. Republicans, Democrats, barely able to see each other as equal human beings, let alone Americans with shared dreams. She has a lot to say about the problem and possible solutions. For the Sunday interview, here's Amy Chua.
White lives matter! White lives matter! Let me go home! Let me go home!
You're the fascist!
By now, these sights and sounds are familiar. America, perhaps more divided than ever.
Hail Trump! Hail our people! Hail victory!
The 2016 presidential campaign exposed discontent amongst those who felt unheard.
We have some bad hombres here, and we're going to get them out.
Donald Trump tapped into that, and his victory inspired both impassioned attacks against him and unflinching loyalty. But why and how did the United States become so deeply polarized on both sides of the political spectrum? Yale Law School professor Amy Chua has written 2 books about foreign policy and is no stranger to America's culture wars.
Amy Chua is giving us a bad name. She's making us look like we're all harsh dragon moms.
In 2011, her blockbuster memoir, Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother, made her a household name.
Basically doesn't let her kids have any fun.
It's almost like the idea of striving for excellence is a bad word.
There was a headline in the U.S., the worst mom in the world.
The descriptions of her strict Chinese parenting style also provoked outrage and even death threats. Now Chua is back to her foreign policy roots. Her new book, Political Tribes, Group Instinct and Fate of Nations, explores the roots of the divisions we're seeing today and what it means to America and the world. I spoke to her recently in Toronto. Let's start with what political tribalism means. How are you defining it?
So human beings are basically tribal animals. You know, we need to belong to groups. And once we connect with a group, our tendency is to want to cling to it and to defend it and to think it's better than every other group. And that's not always bad. You know, family can be very tribalistic, and sports is very tribal. The problem is when tribalism takes over a political system. That's dangerous, because then you start to see everything through the lens of your own tribe.
How does it differ, though, from a political party? You are a 2-party system, basically, in the United States. How does it differ from a political system? Are there parts within it, or how would it work?
Well, it's a great question. So in the United States, the Republicans and the Democrats, there used to be much, much more overlap between the two of them, and there was much more fluidity between these two groups. Now, far more so than, you know, in many, many generations, people say, Republicans say, they don't want their child to marry a member of the other political party. Studies show that people from, say, the Democrats, they now view the other side as actually not just people that they disagree with, but as immoral, worse people, evil people. Now, if you look at the most recent Pew Foundation studies, you see that both sides are way more extreme.
So did Donald Trump see that, see tribes and tap into it in a way that maybe other candidates, other politicians did not?
Absolutely. Donald Trump is a master political tribalist. You know, a lot of people don't understand this. They say, what happened? Why can't the white working class see that Donald Trump is a billionaire? He's nothing like them. But from the view of political tribalism, it's actually very clear. Donald Trump has done a much better job than any other candidate at portraying himself as a member of the same cultural tribe as America's white working class. The sports he watches, you know, NASCAR and worldwide wrestling, he stuffs himself on McDonald's, you know, not vegan health food. So I think that a lot of people I know on the coast, you know, multicultural, we think of ourselves as tolerant. Every time he says something, the feeling is now this is going to bring him down. So misogynist, so racist. But in fact, from the point of view of a lot of working class Americans in the middle of the country, they just identify. They're always getting called out like that.
You talk about something called ethno-nationalism light in the book, which makes sense, except I wondered if there wasn't a danger of it sort of tipping into a darker place.
So now, for the first time in U.S. history, whites are on the verge of losing their majority status. The predictions are usually by about 2044. So the result of that is it's not just minorities who are threatened in the United States. Whites feel threatened too. And so what happens is it's when groups become threatened, they fear that they're losing their dominance. So as a result of this, you see in America a lot of harsh rhetoric that I'm very critical about on both the right and the left. Obviously, easy case, the white supremacists, racists, horrible. On the other hand, I think it's very dangerous for progressives, the left, to then accuse all 60 million people who voted for President Trump as being a white supremacist and racist.
When you talk about America as a supergroup, that's sort of what you should be continuing to strive for. That's where you would like it to stay. Is that fair to say? What is the benefit of that then?
To be a supergroup, first, you need to have a very strong, overarching collective identity, American. That's the first requirement. But secondly, to be a supergroup, you have to allow individual subgroup identities to flourish.
Right.
And Canada has this. You're the mosaic country. But the idea is to have both. So the idea at its best, a supergroup, is a country where you can be, I'm Irish American, I'm Libyan American, I'm Korean American, and yet intensely patriotic at the same time.
The difference, though, between America and Canada is that America promotes the idea of the melting pot, and Canada promotes multiculturalism. Do you think that there is less a threat of tribalism, tribalist politics in Canada because of that? Because we are not trying to push people. I would argue we're probably not as openly proud the way
Absolutely.
We're not to the same extent. So do you think that there's a difference there?
Well, you've put your finger on the most important point of the book. And in this sense, I think, yes, America needs to learn from Canada. But I would put it differently. I think that we always exaggerated the extent to which the melting pot metaphor really applied, because that applied to all of the mostly white European immigrants. So absolutely, we had exceptional assimilation with the Germans, the Poles, the Hungarians, the Italians. But remember, we always had a very large African-American population that absolutely was not part of this great melting pot. Native Americans, whom we extinguished. So I actually think that the mosaic metaphor is a little bit better. The supergroup concept allows both, right? It's like you allow these individual subgroup identities to flourish. Some may assimilate over time, but they don't have to. But here's where I would push back. I think that overarching national identity is very important. And I've heard this when people talk about Canada sometimes.
Not as patriotic.
Yes,
what
or
people say.
is there the same kind of glue? And I think in the United States, it's extremely important to have it because we are much, much more. We have many more immigrants in terms of raw numbers than you do.
Let's end it on this. I think you describe yourself as an optimist in spite of all of this. So how do you move forward then when you know that you have a country that is divided into political tribes, increasingly isolating themselves?
If you can actually pull people out of their groups and have them interact as human beings, it is unbelievable, the progress. Now, I don't just mean exposure. I mean actually interacting with each other.
Sit at a table, get to know each other.
And the two amazing examples I give, one is the integration of the U.S. military in the 50s, and the other example is same-sex marriage. The attitudes towards same-sex marriage changed so dramatically in just 30 years. 30 years ago, 90% of Americans were opposed, and now about 65% are in favor. Why? Because people started to learn that this faceless group of people who wanted same-sex, oh my gosh, it's my cousin, it's my son, it's my neighbor, it's my colleague. And once you humanize that, it's amazing. So norms can change, but to do that, you have to get out of the tribal mindset.
Amy, thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me.
If the idea of tribalism in U.S. politics resonates, consider this. Donald Trump recently hit the highest approval ratings in more than a year, polling somewhere around the mid-40s. But break it down by party, and it's stark. About 90% of Democrats disapprove of him, and more than 80% of self-identified Republicans back him. For Trump, that Republican support matters more by the month.
Do we love Hillary Clinton?
Across the U.S., Democrats and Republicans are holding primaries ahead of this year's pivotal midterm elections.
President Trump and I know that Indiana is going to deliver in 2018.
The stakes for Donald Trump are high. Keeping a hold of Congress will help him push through his agenda for the next 2 years.
Look at all those beautiful red hats. Those beautiful red hats.
But it's more than that. Investigations have been closing in on Trump campaign officials and associates, probing, among other things, links to Russian efforts to meddle in U.S. democracy. If Republicans lose big in the midterms, a Democratic Congress could turn up the heat even further. That's why Trump is out in places like Indiana to rally support for local candidates.
But it can also disappear if you put fools and if you put the wrong people in.
When it comes to the struggles and scandals in Washington, Trump voters may not know for sure what's going on, but many know what side they're on.
Everybody's talking about Russia, and I don't understand why. I really don't.
You're still going to vote for him?
Sure.
Why is that?
Because at this point, I'm going to play the party side.
Loyalty to the party side will help Trump, but on the other side, it fuels the Democratic enthusiasm that threatens him.
All of this, Rosemary, is so interesting, and I think there are a lot of Canadians who struggle to understand the Trump phenomenon. After reading the book, after your entire conversation with her, did you understand it better?
Well, I mean, I think you would agree, Ian, and most people would agree too. In the United States, it's much easier to just pick a sort of set of media organizations and just look at them and just read them, right? And then never see sort of the other side of the story. And that's at least part of it, that, as she pointed out, that people go into their little groups and they just stay there. And they don't have to actually interact or exchange ideas. And because they don't, they just remain sort of entrenched in their thoughts. So it's interesting. She also has lots of thoughts about how that influences American foreign policy, and we're seeing some of that with Donald Trump right now, too. So definitely a good read, even if it's, as she said, maybe not something that would apply necessarily to Canada. It sure helps you understand how American politics are so divisive.